I'm going to start this video with a warning. If you want to enjoy Smash Up, don't play too much 1v1 involving the Geeks. And there's 3 reasons for this. First, they're very overpowered when played well, and they're still pretty darn good even when played badly. Second, there's a lot of things you need to keep track of in a Geeks game from either side, and for me, it feels like there's so many things it needs to calculate that these games can turn into work instead of fun, especially the close games can be a huge amount of work to play. And thirdly, the way Geeks games go, even in matchups that are statistically pretty even, the weaker deck often ends up being helpless. Whether it's the weaker deck this particular game or the weaker deck usually, a lot of the time the losing player just ends up in a helpless position that isn't a lot of fun to play. And so avoid Geeks 1v1 as much as possible. Now, with 3 or 4 players, they're still top or near top tier if you play them well, or more precisely, if you've got the right partners, they can be top or near top tier. But they're still fine. They are not quite as good as robots and zombies, and you also can't play them the same way that you play them in 1v1. In 1v1, you're going to be trying to get the absolute max value out of all your cards. In multiplayer, it's more about, I need to find a pretty good time to play each of these cards, and I want to play most of them against the right opponent. And this tends to lead to a game where everyone can have some fun. Structurally speaking, the Geeks have several little sets of answer cards that punish certain ways you might try to play against the Geeks, and they cover each other fairly well. If you play to make one set of Geeks cards bad, you're probably making some other Geeks card better. And this means that most specific plans to use against the Geeks are going to work if the Geeks give up the wrong card for too little value, or if the Geeks haven't drawn the card they need yet. And the best plan against the Geeks is usually just extreme aggression. If you hold good cards in your hand and save up for a big burst, Bandlist or min-maxing punishes you. If you're playing a deck that relies on keeping actions in play, Rules Lawyer can be just as good, sometimes even better, than destroying the action. And when you're trying to play around their specials, most of the time playing your cards in an order that makes Force of Will or Will Weedon less effective against you runs right into Control Minion, and vice versa. If you try to protect yourself from Control Minion, Force of Will and Will Weedon can beat you. This means that if you can get a look at the Geek's hand, it's really valuable because then you know what cards you actually have to avoid and what cards you can ignore. But in general, playing against the Geeks, at some point you're going to have to make a guess about what they've drawn. And that's why fast, aggressive play is generally the way to go. You, at some point, will have to catch the Geeks on a bad hand. So when playing against the Geeks in 1v1, you want to play aggressively. If you're playing with the Geeks in 1v1, you want to play really good defense, and you want to play to get as much value out of your cards as possible. And I could go over each card talking about a whole bunch of minutiae, but I think it might actually be more helpful to send you over for a little trip into the Hearthstone community and say, watch a few streams by a Hearthstone pro named Trump. He talks a lot about value, he plays a lot of control decks, and he tries to get the absolute most out of every single card in his deck. Not necessarily in terms of trying to win the game quickly, just in terms of trying to get as much value out of every card as possible by playing it against the best possible target at the best time. And his attitude is more or less exactly how you should play your Geeks in 1v1. 4-player is a different story. In 4-player, it's a lot more important to play with good timing than it is to get the best opposing card. Because with the Geeks, you frequently have to identify who is going to be close to you and score at the end of the game, and go after that player at the right time that you don't let the other player pass you instead. And for multiplayer, I'm actually going to throw a game on this video that is multiplayer involving a Geeks deck paired with the Elves. Partner-wise, I'll just give a quick rundown of the Geeks in 1v1 first. There is no such thing as a bad or even average 1v1 deck, including the Geeks. Assuming that if what you mean by an average deck is an average deck that you would get from picking totally random factions, every Geeks combination is at least significantly better than that standard. The 4 very best, in my experience so far, are Alien Geeks, 1 and 2 factions. Pretty obvious that this should be overpowered. Robot Geeks. The best way of playing against the Geeks tends to be extreme aggression. Robots are excellent at counterpunching against extreme aggression, and on top of that, if you've only got 1 set of cards, you've just made sure that your opponent can't play extreme aggression via robots. Zombie Geeks. Bring Will Wheaton back from the discard. For that matter, with Gravedigging, you can bring back Force of Will and Control Minion from the discard too. Also, zombies are a really good faction despite not having any way to target your opponent's cards in 1v1. Obviously, if you pair them with a faction that's really good at targeting your opponent's cards, you're going to get a good deck. And the last of the 4 is Elder Geeks. Elder Things are much weaker than the other 3 factions that combine to make a tier 1 deck with the Geeks, but they have much more synergy. Begin the Summoning allows you to put Will Wheaton back on top of your deck, which is a hugely important deal. Game Guru, as a 3 power that your opponent can't remove, helps you make sure that you will eventually get your Shoggoths into play, even if your opponent tries to deny you Shoggoth. Denying Shoggoth is a very important strategy against the Elder Things a lot of the time, especially against decks that have a lot of destruction. If you can make sure the Elder Things can't play Shoggoth, they usually also can't get any good mileage out of Elder Thing, and they're basically playing a 7-minion faction, which is really, really bad. On top of that, Power of Madness allows you to look at your opponent's hand before you start a banned list, and that means that you can do potentially as many as 3 banned lists where you're hitting a specific card that you know your opponent already has. 2 via playing banned list, 1 via non-infinite loop, and none of them are blind. Elder Things also pass out Madness, which is a great card to ban if there's nothing else specific from your opponent's hand that you want to ban, because once you've given your opponent a Madness, you always know that the Madness is in their hand. Force of Will and Will Wheaton work very well with Madness too. Your opponent frequently needs to spend an action to get rid of the Madness cards, because otherwise the penalties stack too high in a 2-player game. The penalties are not nearly as bad in multiplayer, don't worry about it so much there. And if you counterspell your opponent attempting to remove Madness from their deck, the Madness goes to their discard pile and now they can't get rid of it anymore. On top of that, you can also use min-maxing to play an opponent's Madness and have it go, I believe, to their discard pile, which is pretty annoying to say the least. And I think I've covered most of the major synergies, but I think I've listed so many at this point that you can understand why Elder Things down at number 22 or whatever they actually are doing just as well as a Geeks partner as these top factions. Other honorable mentions are Time Travelers. It's always great to be able to duplicate min-maxing or put Force of Will on top of your deck, and the Time Travelers with their bounce are good at stalling, which means that if you draw a bad hand, your opponent trying to play extreme aggression is less likely to be able to end the game before your draw luck normalizes and you can beat them with the better deck. Cthulhu, similarly, we're going to play a control faction with Geeks, and Geeks don't normally have destruction. Geeks have... Cthulhu Geeks is a good defensive deck, although Cthulhu has a lot more synergy with aliens than they do with Geeks. And any aggressive faction is also going to make a better than normal Geeks deck, because a lot of the time the Geeks both lack the ability to drop a lot of power on their turn, and if they gain the ability to drop a lot of power on their turn, they can often abruptly end an opponent's turn by counterspelling something when they observe, hey, here's a nice spot where I want to make sure they don't break the base. I'm going to break it on my turn with my power drop, and my power drop is going to be well placed. In multiplayer, Elder Geeks and Robot Geeks still hold up well. Alien Geeks does not scale nearly as well to multiplayer as it does in two-player. And Zombie Geeks should still be crazy good because zombies are crazy good in multiplayer. Of those three Tier 1 decks that scale well, I would place the least faith in the Zombie Geeks because the zombies are a little bit prone to bum draws sometimes. Relative to other top factions and multiplayers, the zombies are the most likely to be a little bit coin flippy based on their quality of their opening draw. And I think the Geeks can have a little bit of a problem with bad draws early too. So that's going to be a deck that sometimes dominates and sometimes doesn't do much of anything. And I'm sure there are a number of other power factions that work very well with the Geeks in multiplayer that I haven't tried, but the one I've been getting a lot of ridiculous success with recently is Geek Elves. Elves are a Munchkin faction, and they center around doing things that benefit them and another player at the same time, because the Elves and Munchkin love to help out other players. Help out by doing things that they get rewarded for. And so you have abilities like draw a card, choose one opponent, and that opponent also draws a card. And this paired with the Geeks counterspells means that if you have a good awareness of who right now is the most dangerous, or who right now will not benefit much from drawing extra cards, you can do a lot of helping the less dangerous opponent, not helping the more dangerous opponent, drawing a whole bunch of cards from the Elves. And then the Elves also have a really nice specials package. Between the Elf special package and the Geek special package, it's almost too much to keep track of when you're playing against them, and one of those specials is going to hit a home run in terms of getting a tremendous amount of value at some point. And I'm actually now going to cut to showing a Geek Elves game against two other very strong multiplayer decks, and talking about how you have to evaluate who is dangerous right now and how do I play this extremely political deck. I'm covering a multiplayer game instead of a 1v1 game because, honestly, Geek 1v1 games are not really something you should want to watch. Okay, and it looks like this is working. So this game is Ghost Robots, which is a very good, not quite top tier, but pretty close to it, Robots deck, versus Geek Elves playing second, versus Giant Ant Zombies playing third. And one important thing we have to understand with the Geek Elves is when we use our 4, who is, I will show this off here, Lord of the Prance. Talent, another player of your choice draws a card, draw a card. The question is, who are we going to give those cards to? And if the two opposing decks benefit about equally from drawing extra cards, we generally want to give the extra card to the player who's bringing up the rear in victory points as long as we have a chance to win. If we don't have a chance to win and we're playing for second, a lot of the time we may want to give the card to the player who is farther from us in total score, because the player closer to us in total score, we have a better chance of passing or being passed by in the standings. However, in this matchup, Ghost Robots are very good at dumping a large hand, and so they can benefit very well from having a large hand. Giant Ant Zombies, Giant Zombies have a tendency to overfill their hand a bit. Giant Ants have the same tendency to feel like they can get all the cards, but they are not very good at dumping them all at once. So if we give Giant Ant Zombies extra cards, it's not going to help them as much as it would the Ghost Robots. Just a quick look at the bases in play. Wow, this is actually a really explosive start. So we have Birthday Party. It's a 23. It's assuming nobody blows up that monster, it's going to kill a random minion of 3 power or less at it when it breaks, and you have to play there first. The con is 24-5-3-2. That's 2.4 minion power per VP, but its ability is on the average good for about +2 power, so it's really about a 2.2 ratio, and that's very good. Laboratorium is a printed 25 breakpoint with 5-3-3. That's already 25 to 11, which is like 2.4, which is also really good. But on top of that, the first minion played here each turn gains a +1 counter. And usually, I think on the average, there's about 6 minions played on this base when it breaks. So we're looking at something that's like 19 breakpoint. And this is just straight a 2-to-1, but this has... its ability is actually bad. You don't want to have to discard extra cards when you play there. So really, this is a board on which all the bases besides Birthday Party are so good that players can choose freely to either spread out or stay in one place as they see fit. Usually there's a much bigger difference, and so there's some reason to play at the same base as the other players. And I'm really not going to spend much time showing you what the other decks are doing. I'm going to focus on the Geek Elves because I tried another game before to show that as a game, and it lasted over 50 minutes when I showed all 5 things. So let me just double check on my camera. Yes, those cards are all visible, even though you can't tell what they are so much. Fae Fighter, Elf Health Guru, Cosplay, Game Guru, and Trade. When playing Elf Geeks, we like to save our trade until late in the game because if we double trade somebody on one of the last turns of the game while we're holding Will Wheaton or Force of Will, the extra action on trade means that we give the trades to another player, and when they try to trade us back, we can force the first trade. They lose their extra action. They end up unable to play the other ones, and if we end the game before they can play them, trade no longer has the downside that we've given it to our opponent. We might as well have discarded it instead. So that's a very strong play for Elf Geeks, and it means we're going to wait on trade unless we really have to play it. Okay, so Elf Help Guru could get blown up by the Ghost Robots. I should just play Game Guru. Should I? Okay, so the reason I'm hesitating on Game Guru here is that the monster destroying a random minion of power 3 or less is not another player's ability. I do not want to play Fae Fighter at the worst base on the board, but honestly, I'm just going to give up the Game Guru, risk it getting blown up, because the really important thing is to be able to play on these other strong bases, and Game Guru cannot be removed by our opponents, which means that we're going to be able to play where the action really is. Giant Ant Zombies, I'll just point out one of the big deals with them is the fact that Killer Queen actually does something. Killer Queen actually does something because we can play multiple minions in a turn with Giant Ant Zombies. I'm going to play Outbreak to play an extra minion to get Killer Queen out and active. I had to think about this because I don't really want to play a lot of stuff on the worst space on the board, but activating my Killer Queen immediately is a big deal, and getting stuff on the first turn means that they can sort of, you know, at this point, probably this base will break, so we would like to have first. Look at the top card. This is getting discarded because we need to get to Tenacious Z's and other stuff that does lots of stuff on the board. Use the talent because we played another minion this turn. So basically, we're seeing Swarm decks dropping 5 and 8 power on the first turn. That's the main thing we care about as the Geek Elves. 13, 16. This is at 16 out of 23. Could we break it? Do we care? I would love to play Zapbot into Microbot Guard combo here to draw 3 cards off the Tech Center, but it doesn't happen to work. It mainly doesn't work because the Guard wouldn't have a legal target other than itself. So we're going to drop a Spirit here. I use the blue counters for +1s and the green counters for victory points. All right. Geek Elves' second turn. We have an 8 to 5 to 3 here. R3 is plenty when it comes to getting 1 victory point for 3 minion power is a perfectly decent deal. So we are more or less happy. I'm not going to commit Fae Fighter immediately. I am going to cycle this fan because I know I don't need it. We get a Flower Child. The only minion we could steal with that right now is that Walker, and we're happy to let other players have a lot of 3 power and less minions at this space because of that monster. So I'm not very interested in playing Flower Child right now. I am not interested in dropping Fae Fighter on Laboratorium. Laboratorium is not going to break before my next turn. So I think the sharpest base... I don't have any cards I really, really don't like to discard to Haunted House, but I could get rid of that Elf Help Guru. Fae Fighter is better if it's in play longer, and that's why I'm considering this. The con, we have very poor chances of winning against robots in general, so we don't really want to take a very strong stand there. I'm actually going to drop Fae Fighter on Haunted House, discarding Elf Help Guru, drawing 2 cards at end of turn. And that might be wrong. I mean, it's 4-3-2 is a very flat distribution, but we know that's going to break eventually. It's too good a ratio not to, and Fae Fighter can be a lot more than 5 power for 1. On top of that, neither of these enemy decks can remove a large minion. They can just mainly remove small and mid-sized ones. Alright, we do not have anything... to return from discard. Okay, play the drone, use the talent. After we do that, calculate what happens with We Will Rock You. I'm going to talk about all sorts of ways of playing around We Will Rock You when I get to the Giant Ants video, but in multiplayer, you can't really play around it very well. So, 6, 9, 14, 17, 22. This is almost breaking. I'm going to massively overkill it with We Will Rock You. The Giant Ant Zombies have 19 power, which they've achieved in 2 turns. And on top of that, they've succeeded in making sure that the Game Guru is going to die. Active player gets to choose whether this monster ability happens before or after players get a chance to play specials. Sensible to make it happen before, since we know that the Geek Elves are not in a good way if this thing dies. They do that, they let it break. Ghost robots cannot possibly have any specials because there are none in their deck, and that is 4-2, and revealing a treasure, which is the Halfling Hireling, which goes to the Giant Ant Zombies. So at this point, we have now gotten through the opening base, and as the Geek Elves, we're already on the back foot, so to speak. This base is a 21-4-2-1. Even if it didn't have a bad ability for players who play at it, it still wouldn't get much attention given the amount of victory points available on here. And the fact that with 2 rush decks, some of these bases could break very quickly. I totally forgot Fae Fighter's ability. Fae Fighter is definitely getting a counter there. Which means, in turn, that We Will Rock You did not get played because the base was already breaking after Fae Fighter's ability. So we put that back in their hand. Alright. Let's play the Ghost Robots quickly because there's sort of not a point here. 6 power, it's eventually going to happen. Now we have a way to get off a good tech center. They've been looking to get a good tech center because they have a sort of a meh hand that has a bunch of stuff. Microbot Guard is still awkward to play here because it will kill itself, but we can play that Archive. Now we've got 3 cards there. We only get we Tech Center for 3. They actually have a double Tech Center hand. I hadn't looked. I can look over there. One nice thing of making these guys the protagonists is that way I know I don't have to stop and look at the hand to see if they have a special, because they're the ones who are really going to have the specials. All right. 4, 7, 8 power here. While we're at it, let's put those 2 on and give the Fae Fighter 2 counters. We have 8. This feels fairly safe, and this base is super flat anyway. We just have to make sure we don't get royally messed with at Laboratorium. Because with 5-3-3, it's not all that important to be winning Laboratorium, but if it breaks with you left off it, you're in a very bad way. Now let's look at how good our discard pile is. We have Fan Elf, Help Guru, Game Guru. That's not great, so we don't really want to play Dancing Groot yet. We would like to at least get the cosplay in our discard before doing that. We do have a banned list. But there are no specific definite threats from the robots to go after. We would really like to either pair up this banned list so we have two, or wait for the zombies to start returning stuff to their hand that we know they really want, and then we can ban those to the bottom of their deck. So we don't have any terribly good things to do, so we end our turn, draw 2 cards. Alright. What's in here? Just a walker when it comes to Halfling Hireling, getting a counter. Against the Geeks, we do want to try to play known cards in our hand as quickly as possible, because that way they can't. The Geeks cannot banned list them away from us. Zombie Lord. The Zombie Lord's ability triggers before Haunted House's ability because we resolved the card just played first. That brings out a walker. We have to finish resolving the walker before we go to anything else. And we are going to put this in our discard pile, but we can't play it at Treehouse because we already finished resolving the zombies. Well, we already finished playing the extra stuff for Zombie Lord's ability. We do those all at once. So we can't get this worker into play, but now Haunted House triggers, we have to discard a card, we trigger a Tenacious Z. And now, where do we want to play Tenacious Z? Oh, good lord, I totally forgot. The Fate Fighter is just going to be repeatedly triggering here. The reason Fate Fighter is repeatedly triggering is because it would be really nice to ice the robots out of this base. And the Geek Elves don't feel threatened about having the con break before their turn. They don't really care about trying to fight for first place in Laboratorium, so there really is no reason for them to not give Giant Ant Zombies extra counters on the board as it stands. This is at 11-5, which means that the Giant Ant Zombies are absolutely playing Tenacious Z there to break it. They discard the Walker. It's the best card to discard in their hand. I don't know if they've played an action yet. I think they have, but it doesn't matter because they don't need to. Alright. More counters. 12 power Fey Fighter versus 9 powers from Zombies. We Will Rock You would not tie it, so they don't play it. Geeks Elves haven't seen it. Score the base. Ghost Robots cannot possibly have any answer to that. They don't have anything. But we will play the cosplay. You basically always want to play this as soon as you can, especially since they're holding Dancing Groot and would like to shuffle cosplay back into their head. Into their deck, not their head. Good lord, I don't know how you would even do that. So they get 5, they get 3. So that single Fae Fighter has gotten the Geek Elves into sort of a middling score position against these 2 rush decks at this point in time. Nice thing about this deck is it has a lot of good stuff that happens when it's not your turn. And that is critically important against rush decks. Interestingly enough here, Web Troll. Web Troll is a card I really actually don't like. It makes Munchkin significantly less fun for me because these bases that pull out, 2 or 3 monsters at once, I like to reach for 2 or 3 monsters all at one time, and then I look at it, it's like, oh, there's a Web Troll there, I have to grab an extra one. Then the next one turns out to also be a Web Troll, and so I'm grabbing for extra monsters multiple times. It gets annoying. In any case, Giant Ant Zombies draw 2. Ghost Robots. Alright, Ghost Robots are actually quite bad off for scoring. They have 10 to 4 to 4, on a 25 here. They're going to be solidly behind if they break and win this, let alone if they don't manage to win it. Alright, so 10 to 4 to 4. We don't care that our opponents are tied because second and third place are the same. So how are we going to get 7 points? We're going to play a Hoverbot first. It gets a +1 counter, but we reveal the top card first. You may play it as an extra minion. Yes, please. Now, we would rather have drawn that Alpha than played it as an extra minion, because now we've got a little bit of an awkward situation with the fact that our Alpha is just not going to be large enough. Ghostly Arrival lets us play an extra minion. So we play the Spirit here. 4, 7, 9, 13, 17 to 4 to 4. That's enough to break the base. And we played the Spirit here so that we could tech center 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards. This is when this 5-card tech center is the first time I would have considered playing Force of Will or Will Wheaton. And if I was going to play Will Wheaton, the Will Wheaton actually would have landed on the con. Normally, you like to play your counterspells late in the game as Geeks in multiplayer because you want to know who's actually threatening. Alright, this is a 9-card hand. Smash it, score the base. They have no specials. The only specials they could have are moving counters around. They actually have it. Alright, so now, do we move those counters around? Elf Geeks can't have anything that kills a 2. Ghost Robots also can't have anything that kills a 2, so we might as well play Under Pressure to transfer 2+1 counters over to the Walker, get us a better chance of breaking con, depending on what the Elf Geeks do. These cards look nice, but they're actually not terribly high value a lot of the time. Alright, 5 points, 3 points, 3 points, see what the new base is. Do take note of how I've been playing as the Geeks defending against a faster deck. The big thing I'm doing is I'm saying my best defender, if I need to just grab second or third place safely, is Game Guru. Because Game Guru doesn't die to anything except, you know, Hippogriff. Which was partially bad luck that, because against zombies, it's very reasonable that there might be several possible Hippogriff targets. It just happened that the ant zombies were able to avoid that. Okay, that's a 26 for 4-2-1. There haven't been enough treasure cards drawn. The Mines is another base that shouldn't see a lot of play. Okay, so that was Ghost Robot's turn. They draw 2. They have to discard something. It's actually going to be a guard. The fact that they discarded a guard from an 11-card hand also should tell us as their opponents they almost certainly have both guards. With a hand that large, robots are going to have multiple plays. Discarding the guard might even have been wrong, even on that 11-card hand, but I didn't want to think a lot. But what we should be understanding as the Geek Elves playing against the Ghost Robots is they're holding the second guard. Even if I hadn't seen that in the hand, I know that they're either holding the second guard or they're doing something very dumb. Cycle that card, get another just as bad minion. They haven't played their Gravedigger yet, so yeah, they don't have anything in their hand we know. The Microbots might have the hand from hell. But, so, at this point, if the Microbots had, if the Ghost Robots had a points lead, I would be banning Zapbot, most likely, or possibly, I might guess whether they've got Microbot Reclaimer or Microbot Fixer. But Zapbot is the most likely card involved in a large robot point stump. I also realized just now that the Best play here is hideously obvious in terms of what I'm playing. I'm playing Flower Child and stealing that alpha. The only question is, am I going to play Flower Child at the con, or am I playing it elsewhere? The one advantage, normally I would want to play it in the middle of nowhere, where it wasn't going to be helping anyone make a real play, because the ghost robots don't have movement anyway. So this minion is going to be useless if it never breaks, if it's at a base that never breaks. However, there is a bit of a benefit to playing it at the con. If we had a hand with some large elves minions, we could give the Flower Child +1 when we played another elf minion, but I don't think that's helpful in this case. We don't have a good enough hand, so we give them the Flower Child over here, take control of the Microbot Alpha. Okay, we've got a pretty good hand in here. We're going to Dancing Root. So shuffle, all players shuffle their discard piles into their decks, draw a card. As it is, the zombies have a nice discard that we would like to make sure they don't have. So Dancing Root makes all the sense in the world here. Drawing Felicia Day is a very nice pickup against rush decks too. Now, in a Munchkin game, first off, in a non-Munchkin game, Felicia Day reads, throw everything on this base and break it instantaneously, basically. In a Munchkin game, Felicia Day often reads, throw all this stuff onto this base, and if people don't have movement abilities, it is so jammed with monsters that it's probably going to suck. Very different card. So, however, we're not going to want to play it anytime soon because we have that alpha, and that alpha is so good. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe we're going to be able to inflate that alpha to the point where we're just winning any large base. Alright, well that fan is going away at end of turn, but at least we got one good pickup. This is not necessarily great draw luck for the Geek Elves, but funny thing is, even though they haven't done much, they're still right in the middle on score. Alright, Gravedigger has just turned into an awful card, because there's absolutely nothing to return. We are just going to continue playing at the con. Look at this. I don't want this right now. It's going to give us 3 counters next turn, but we need to draw something that does... Well, they have We Will Rock You in their hand, which is going to do +3 already because there's +3 counters in play, so that's almost as good. Alright. There is no point in opening with Microbot Reclaimer here. Hoverbot, Zapbot. Well, in that case, Microbot Guard killing the alpha. This way we can reshuffle it back into our deck with a Reclaimer next turn. And we've got 8 to 7 at the con. Now, let's just be sure that we haven't just missed... These were all played this turn, so this is actually a 6, this is a 4, this is a 3, so it's 14 to 7. No, it's not breaking yet. Alright, cycle a fan. Non-infinite loop. Non-infinite loop. Now we can double band list. I'm not even thinking about this with the robots. We name Reclaimer immediately. With the alpha in the discard, Reclaimer is currently a better card than Fixer. Fixer is not going to be massively boosting an alpha. Reclaimer is making it possible to get the alpha back. So for them, we're naming Reclaimer. Gimme the Prize got discarded. For them, we're naming... They're either holding... That means... Now, can I justify why I'm naming We Will Rock You here, even though I know it's in their hand as a player? The fact that they discarded a Gimme the Prize probably means that either they have no minions in their hand, or they have We Will Rock You, or a second Gimme the Prize. Given that and the fact that they have 3 counters in play, yes, I think I can say I'm justifying guessing We Will Rock You here. So, We Will Rock You go. Now, what I see when I look at their hand, because this is important when playing the double band list, I'm seeing Gravedigger, a kind of magic, under pressure. Honestly, that's a crappy hand right now, given the fact that I just nuked their discard pile. Gravedigger is probably the best card in the hand, even though it's a vanilla 4 right now, so I'm probably planning on banning that next turn. A kind of magic is not so good in multiplayer. It's hard to pull it off. So I might just be banning, if they play the Gravedigger, I probably ban Under Pressure. That transfers counters before base scores, just because that can potentially save some counters in future. So plan is to ban Gravedigger first, Under Pressure as second choice next turn. Nice thing about Under Pressure as second choice is it's a special. It's not likely to leave play immediately. I still haven't played a Minion. Okay. So for them, they got their Reclaimer banned. We get to look at their hand, and here's where we see Hoverbot. Well, we see a Tech Center. We're going to ban that if we get a chance, but we're not going to get a chance. We might need to ban Across the Divide, because that can get their Alpha back. So Across the Divide or Tech Center, they can't play both those actions in the same turn, so we can safely say that next turn we're definitely banning either Across the Divide or Tech Center. For them, it's Gravedigger or Under Pressure. Okay, now that I've figured that out, now we can play a Minion. Did they have a Spirit in hand? They do not have a Spirit in hand. And that means that my 2 is going to stay. And there is absolutely no way I can compete at the con anyway. Now, by any chance, do I want to gunk up a base? I do. There is so much, I mean, there is so much stuff in play for our opponents that we are playing Felicia Day at Bastion. Everything moves to Bastion. And the beautiful thing is this includes the... So, we used Felicia Day in multiplayer as a reset button. The downside is we've just created 2 very low breakpoint, very good bases over here. But we've reset our opponents at the con, so that's something. I am going to figure out what the breakpoint is at Bastion, and then just sort of ignore it for the rest of the game. So how many undead monsters? Okay. 11, 15, 18, 21, 22, 23, 24. Now, there are how many undead monsters? 7 undead monsters. These are 8 apiece. So that's 56 breakpoint. This base is done for. It's never breaking. 56 breakpoint is just too large. Nobody's going to bother. So we have Felicia Day nuked the position. The downside to this is we've just made their alpha really, really good because they have 5 minions sitting here at a base that will never break, and these 5 minions are going to give +5 to the alpha. So that's the downside to what we did. Okay. 15... I don't want to play at Treehouse. As Giant Ant Zombies... I don't want to play at Treehouse. It's just... Oh, man. Do we want to play at Mines or do we want to play at Con? I think we want to play at Mines, because our hand is so crappy that we're not... We don't have the gas for a 24 breakpoint base. Okay. Robots. How are robots going to play this position? We know the second band list is coming. We're just across the dividing a Microbot Alpha into play. We're not playing it there. We're playing it here. And do we dare give the Geek Elves a card? I think this early in the game, we've got to be concerned about the guy with 10 victory points, so we will, in fact, give the Geek Elves a card. They're not a deck I like to give cards to, but... Okay, so now, Tech Center is getting banned. We just play the banned list first, ask questions later, ban the Tech Center, and while we're banning the Tech Center, we're going to take a look and see... The hand is a mess. There are 8 different unique cards in there. But the main thing we see is we don't see any fixers, we don't see any reclaimers, and we see only one Zapbot. So it's probably not a very explosive hand. And against them, they played their Gravedigger, so we are banning Under Pressure. Which, since there are 3 cards left, and we see that they have Maulcrawl and are going to get something going. You know, that was going to do something since these power counters are sort of orphaned. Alright. Now, the strategic idea behind dropping the Alpha here was that we create sort of double threats against the Elf Geeks too, which is awkward to deal with. There are no 3s we really want to steal, so we're going to hold on to that Flower Child. Did we see a second guard in their hand? They have the second guard. Because they have the second guard and we're only playing a 2-power minion, unless cycling this fan gives us something, it doesn't. It gives us Griever. I want to play at the base they don't already have a minion at, because they could go... Here they could and probably would consider going Zapbot, Guard, and killing our minion. Here we can at least guarantee the 1 VP, which is all we can guarantee on this, but we'll get 2 with Helping Hands. And now we draw a Game Guru, a better minion to play, and we draw Control Minion. We're going to want to use Control Minion, maybe a base later, and we would really, really like to hit Microbot Fixer or Microbot Reclaimer with it. Because that will let us just drop take control of the minion, drop another minion of our own when it's not our turn. That's the plan with Control Minion against robots usually. That was our draw at end of turn, so it's Giant Ant Zombie's turn. Alright, 4-2 at an 18. They have 5. So here, in this case, score is 10-8 to 7. We want to make sure that we don't get left off of any bases. So we're playing Gravedigger here. We're playing Time to Ask a Question. What would they get? They would get a fan. I'm considering Control Minioning the Gravedigger, but we don't have anything good enough in our discards. If as Elf Geeks we had Will Wheaton in discard, that Gravedigger probably would have gotten Control Minioned. Maulcrawl, they don't have a force. Go fetch the Tenacious Z. We have to let someone draw a card. It's going to be the Ghost Robots this time, because they have the fewest points. And we're going to force some action at Treehouse from the Ghost Robots by beating their current score. Now, giving them 2 cards as Ghost Robots is a little dangerous, but we're hoping to bury, as Giant Ant Zombies, we're hoping to actually bury the Geek Elves enough that they don't steal a win with specials at the end of the game, which is always a threat if they're close. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so this is a 6. They've tied us 6-6. And this is a case where we're basically, as the Giant Ant Zombies, we're basically making the Ghost Robots an offer they can't refuse, which is to keep the Geek Elves out of this space entirely. We do not want to play the Reclaimer. What we want to do... This brings us to 10 because the Alpha gets +1. I think we have to give them the card. And it does so in a way that gives us the best chance to get more minions into play. And this is where we might as well guard something. Hang on a minute. I'm going to back up. I'm going to back up because that hoverbot, 10-6, that's already breaking. It would be 7-6 to 3. We want to control Minion the Hoverbot. We want to control Minion the Hoverbot because this base is already breaking. 6, 6, 3. Do we, though? Yes, because we have Helping Hands. If we didn't have Helping Hands, control minioning this Hoverbot would be a horrible play because if the Ghost Robots didn't have an action that changed the status quo at this base, they would tie for first and both score 4 points, which would be even worse than, at least it would be just as bad as not being on the base at all. So we're going to reveal the top card of our deck, and it's Force of Will. That ends their minion play. They still get an action, and right now the score is 6 to 6 to 3. And what are they playing? Well, they're going to play in... They don't have a spirit. They're actually just going to play a corporeal to get it out of their hand because they don't have spirit. And so right now they can't use large hand size with a lot of big minions that don't have abilities very well. Okay, so score the base. Don't even check them for specials because there are none in their deck. This is where Helping Hands is absolutely golden. Now, the first question we have to ask is what specials can our opponents play? They can play specials that move counters. They have none. Moving counters can only increase their power. That means that we would like to make them win the base. Also, we can't make them win the base anyway because incorporeal. So, this minion gets +2 power. They go to a 1. We don't need to check for their specials. First off, because there's one of their 2 specials got banned, but second, because there's no reason for them to do it. So, 3 points, 2 points, 2 points, because we stole a point from the winner. That's going to become a 5. That was a case where I wouldn't have missed that if I was not playing all 3 decks at the same time with a camera in front of me. But that was one case where the specials have to be played at the right time because as Elf Geeks, we wait until there's actually an emergency, and then we pop the stuff we need to pop. Draw 2. And by hitting a robot that had an extra play, we increased the possibility that we would get to have a large tempo advantage out of that control minion. Unfortunately, what we ended up doing was showing our opponents that we've got Force of Will in our hand at the end of this turn, which is really not something we wanted to do. All right. 4-2-1, 5-3-2. With one player at 13 and that player having a bit of a development lead, this has turned into a situation where alright, they know we have trade. Game Guru, trade. We're going to force their first action next turn if it's trade on us and we have anything that they would want to get. We're going to consider forcing whatever they trade. We get a kind of magic. We really are not interested in that card. But it was worthwhile at least digging for something. We were hoping for a useful minion. We still have an action. So we're going to play Griefer. We saw that the Ghost Robots have the Ghost card that returns a minion from their discard pile to their hand. So with Griefer, we're going to name to both... here's Griefer. We're going to name for both of our opponents, shuffle your discard pile into your deck. With the zombies, we're making sure that Tenacious Z gets deactivated. With the robots, we're making sure that they can't return Alpha to their hand and play it. They still might draw the darn card, but that's much less threatening than the fact that we know they can put it back in their hand with the hand they have. And now we have to ask the question, based on the 2 cards we draw, if they trade us, are we forcing the trade? If they trade us, if they hit one of these 4 cards, we really don't care. We would rather have the trade back than those. If they hit Force of Will, we might lose the game because of that. If they hit Cosplay, we... Okay, so there's a 2 in 3 chance that their trade isn't scary, and a 1 in 3 chance that their trade is game-losingly bad. If we get a chance to trade them again, is that going to help us? That's going to be interesting. Let's first find out if they're going to play trade, because this is going to be a very critical position. So as the ant... Excuse me. As the ant zombies, we know no control minion. We know Force of Will is present. It can't be bad to trade them here because we don't have another action we want to play. So we do play trade. And now as the Elf Geeks, we have to figure out, do we go for... Do we let them get the 1 in 3 chance to completely ruin us, or do we force right now? So if we force it, we've got Elf Help Guru or Flower Child. We can get to 7 or 8 if we steal something with Flower Child. They are likely to be, somewhere in the 7 to 8 range themselves. We basically have to win the base. And that means that we can play our Pumping Iron. So 7 from this go to 10. One of them gets +2. We can play. I think if we force trade, we're probably going to... If we force trade, we have a good chance of winning the game via winning this base and then playing Cosplay. If we don't force the trade, we might get a better minion, but I'm guessing that with Pumping Iron in our hand and no monsters on this base, we have a reasonable chance of winning the base on our next turn. Good enough that we want to go for the opportunity to go Minion, win base, Cosplay, and end the game by hitting 15. Now, of course, this is also dependent on the Ghost Robots taking second. But showing that Walker here, wow, that is just the worst thing they could have seen just about now, I think. They've got to draw minions, honestly. And I know that gives them Tenacious, but it also burns their action play. I think they have to just discard it. And they did draw 2 power at least. Okay, so now we've got 5 to 6, and this is actually starting to look like this might be dead winning for the Elf Geeks, depending on what the Ghost Robots do. We have not seen the Cosplay. We know they can't have been holding it since the beginning of the game. So as a result, we probably aren't giving them much credit for having Cosplay. We would actually, as Ghost Robots, be less surprised to see a Will Wheaton than that Cosplay. So we're not going to play around it. Well, so, as Ghost Robots, if we win this base, they get second and they go to 15. That means we finish second in the game. Is there a believable sequence of events that gets us to first place? That's what we have to ask at this point. And I don't think for the Ghost Robots there is a believable sequence of events that wins first place, which means they actually have to play for second if they can get it. So, can they take second place right now? Wait. They do have a play. 1, 3, 5, and I'm going to do that shuffle, but in a bit. Kill that. Oh, wait, there was nothing to shuffle. 6 to 5 to 4. Draw 2. That worked as a defensive play because we don't mind them getting 1 VP and going to 14 as long as we win the base. Of course, we're probably not going to win the base, but that base was definitely breaking, so no, there was really no play the Ghost Robots had that involved going somewhere else and ignoring this. Okay, so Elf Help Guru, Pumping Iron, and here we ask the question, choose another player, that player chooses a minion to gain +2 power until the end of the turn. Then you choose a minion to get +3 power until the end of the turn. So right now it's 7 to 6 to 4. We just want to make sure that they get last so that we can end the game off our cosplay, which keep in mind, neither opponent can really expect to be a very likely card in our hand. As a result, we give them the choice. If they add +2, they'll have 8. We go to 10 from Pumping Iron, so we're still winning. They can't have specials. We also want to do this because if they have a special that moves counters, this could become a 7. So we give them the option. They either take 8 power, which is what they're actually going to do, or they give +2 to a monster somewhere. It really doesn't matter because we're going to 10. 10 to 8 to 4 score the base. Double check to see if anyone has a special. It wouldn't matter, but they have no specials. We score 4 points, 2 points, 1 point, cosplay, score 5th point. And that's a 15-14-11 win over 2 rush decks. So first off, this was a very lucky pickup of that cosplay. If the Geek Elves had not drawn the cosplay, they would not have been able to win this game, because they were behind on minion power overall against these 2 decks for the whole game. But they dropped a Felicia Day bomb to hit a reset button on their opponents in the middle of the game with a whole bunch of monsters in play, and that was a very, very important play, because that let them make up for the fact that they had no power drop by canceling a tremendous amount of their opponent's power drop. They also saved Control Minion and Force of Will until they hit an absolutely emergency situation, at which point they stole a Hoverbot, which was something that grants an extra minion play. Since it's something that grants an extra minion play, it slowed down the robots even more than a Control Minion normally would, and it also gave them a chance to possibly gain some extra tempo off the top of their deck. In the end, it didn't. It actually revealed a critical special from the top of their deck, which is actually really bad. But didn't matter all that much. They used Helping Hands, and they did hit the opponent who was in the lead with Helping Hands, which was very important. So a lot of stuff really just, they managed to use their specials for as much as possible, and that was really what won the game for them. And they were also helped by the fact that Ghost Robots did not draw the best of hands, and they drew their reshuffle cards from both the Elves and the Geeks, and those reshuffle cards let them disrupt the zombies when the zombies tried to play, tried to do what zombies do, reanimating stuff. Elf Geeks, the zombies try to play zombies, you say, reshuffle, reshuffle, you are not going to get to do what your faction wants to do. Similarly with the robots, by using the double band list, the Geek Elves learned that the Ghost Robots were holding, where is that card? It got shuffled back into their deck at some point. I keep forgetting the name of it for some reason. Where is it? Across the Divide. That's the card I was thinking of. They kept remembering that the ghosts were holding Across the Divide, and because of that, they knew that with that one card in the Ghost Robot's hand, a alpha in the discard is actually an alpha in hand with the mere cost of an action, which is never going to conflict with Ghostly Arrival because you just play the Ghostly Arrival first to get your extra minion play. And so, as a result, every Ghost Robot hand was more dangerous with that Across the Divide in hand and the Microbot Alpha in discard. Therefore, it was actually a good idea to shuffle the Alpha in. And a lot of the times there are these little plays that you can make with your Geeks decks where you just understand, in this particular situation, this card is very well placed here. Or in this situation, my opponent's deck is going to start to work if I let them have this development. I need to mix stuff up. And you also saw, me, in general, just me being very stingy with the specials. I should still emphasize, I think they got lucky this game, but it was also a lucky where they had a few different ways they could have gotten lucky that they didn't. Will Wheaton could have come out at some point. He never did. They drew the Fae Fighter once. They never drew Lords of the Prance, which, if they had drawn Lords of the Prance, they wouldn't have been in some of the trouble of not having enough minions all game. They would have had a better supply of minions to play. So, all in all, that's somewhat of how you have to play Geek Elves, or Geeks in general, in a multiplayer situation when you're facing two rush decks. I hope you were able to follow a decent amount of what was going on, because, it's always hard to lay these cards out in a way that's clear to the watcher. Now I'm going to stop this video because I think I'm babbling.